All right. Welcome, everybody, to episode number 61 of Collectable Live. Today is Tuesday, February the 7th, 2023, and my name is Jeremy Lee. I would like to thank everyone who tuned in with us last week and thank Atal Tawari of Cult Wines. Wow, did we learn a lot about collecting and investing in fine wines. And I want to thank everybody for all the great feedback we had on that episode. But here we are, the next one. Let's bring out our guest. He is an expert, a collector, a dealer in comic book art. Glen, Brunswick, welcome to Collectable Live. And how are you today?
I'm good, Jeremy. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you're welcome. I'm excited too. This is going to be back-to-back weeks where I get to learn a lot more about an area of collecting that I am not familiar with. Obviously, I'm aware of comic books, but original comic art is fascinating. And I think we are in for a treat with you today. To everyone who is joining us in the chat, please feel free to put in some questions and comments, and we will get to as many as we can. I have a lot of questions for Glen today, so I have a feeling I might have your questions covered, but let's just start off, Glen, right out of the gate here. How exciting is the world of original comic art these days?
I mean, I think it's like a great place to be in terms of, I mean, first of all, I have tons of empathy for anyone that's a collector of anything, because, you know, obviously it's a sickness or, you know, but you know, I think if you are a collector of anything, whether it be sports cards or comic books or comic art or cars or whatever it is, I mean, I think that you will be thoroughly entertained, you know, with the collecting bug, and hopefully future generations will value the trash that you've collected and be excited by it. But comic art today is just booming. It's sort of like, you know, was comic books you know, little cousin, and I think it's like grown up. You know, all the auction houses pretty much have comic art now, and you know, you can see it everywhere. So I just think that, like, it's a really exciting time in this space. Prices have never been higher. So from a dealer standpoint and collector standpoint, if you have amassed a great deal of things, then that's a good thing. And if you're just started collecting last week, I apologize to you.
Well, you know, you said that you hope that future generations are going to continue to value these mementos and artifacts, and that's what these things are. The same with sports cards and memorabilia. These are historical artifacts, and history is something that'll never go away. There will always be history, and I think as humans, there will always be an interest in history, and connecting with history can be accomplished by collecting. And you said, you know, it's almost a disease, if you will, or, you know, and there is a, you know, we are addicted to what we collect. A lot of us are. I'll be the first to say it. So I think that won't be a problem. Are you yourself, Glen? Now, you know, you are a dealer, you're an investor, a collector. Which one do you consider yourself to be the most? If you had to rank order how you participate in the hobby, could you let us know?
Sure. These days, I consider myself pretty much a dealer. I have been a collector in the past. I do have a collection, things that I'm interested in keeping. I wouldn't call myself an investor necessarily in terms of the hobby, and it's hard to, like, really sort of like think of these things as investments per se. But I mean, I think when you're spending, you know, over a few $1,000s on anything, I guess you have to look at it a little bit like, you know, you want to make a judicious purchase, because, you know, I mean, if you think about it, if you have a family, if you have other obligations, there's an opportunity cost, obviously, if you're spending a certain amount of money. And so therefore you do have to think about it a little bit. Like, you want to make sure that you're getting something at below or at market value, and that you're not overpaying for something. So yes, I guess I would be like a dealer first and a collector second, although it wasn't always that way. I incorporated and became a dealer in 2017. And previous to that, I was more of a collector.
Yeah, no, that's great. I wanted to ask how you got into this in the first place. You know, I'm going to take a guess, and I don't know this. We didn't discuss.
Okay.
would assume as a young kid, you were buying comic books and reading them. And
Right.
it comes down to, is it nostalgia for you? But before we get to nostalgia, how did you first get involved? What brought you into the original comic art space?
So I was actually was a literary agent in Hollywood. I was reading scripts and representing writers, and a buddy of mine threw a couple of Sotheby's catalogs on my desk, and one of them was it was like from 1991, and in that catalog was the complete story by Gil Kane and John Romita Sr. to Amazing Spider-Man number 121 for sale. And this is like the issue where Gwen Stacy is killed by the Green Goblin, and it was like a landmark issue because a major character's girlfriend is killed. And when I was a kid reading, yes, I was a kid reading comics. In my mind, Gwen Stacy, like Spider-Man was my favorite character, and Gwen Stacy, his girlfriend, was my girlfriend, basically. So when they killed her, I was like, oh my God, this is shocking for a 12-year-old. So, so then okay, so I'm an adult now, and I'm looking at this catalog, and I'm going, oh my God, I can own this stuff. This is insane. How is this even possible? I had no idea. And so then I started to seek it out, and a few years later, I was like buying art pretty regularly, although there was no internet back then, and it was much harder. You had to sort of network by telephone, and if you wanted to buy something from a collector, it was like over a fax machine, or they'd actually send you Xeroxes in the mail of the art that you could potentially purchase. And if you did, you'd get it months later in a big mailed envelope. I remember getting really expensive pieces of art left at my doorstep where there was no security while I was at work, and they would like just sit there for hours, thankfully not being stolen. But like anyone could have just like walked into the building and said, wow, this is great, $5,000 item, fun for me.
In the sports card world, we can go to a local card shop. You can sometimes go to a Target, and you can buy cards there. Comic books, you can go to a comic store. You can go to some corner stores and buy some comic books. Where does original comic art come from? Like, was it the property of the artist? Was it the property of the comic book company, Marvel, DC, indie companies? Where does this stuff come from? How do you find it?
So yeah, well, I guess you could pretty much say that like legally it was probably the property of the artist, but the big companies like Marvel and DC never used to return the artwork at all. They would keep it. They deemed that it was theirs. In some cases, they would give it away to fans, like when they came to visit the offices. When it rained really, really heavily and the floors flooded in New York City, they would use the art to mop up the floors. I mean, they really didn't like value it. They really didn't think about it. It was only at a certain point that Marvel decided to return the artwork to the artists. I believe it was either late 70s, early 80s, because there were like tax implications. Like if they said that they owned it, then they had to pay tax on it. They didn't want to pay the tax to the state. And so they said, okay, we're going to return the art to the artist. So it was a financial decision, and that's how it's been done ever since. Nowadays, the art is returned to the artists, and the artists sell the art themselves. And some of them have art reps that you can contact and buy art from the artist directly, which is always really nice. I happen to represent Rob Liefeld, and you can buy his art directly through me. Rob is famous for the Deadpool character and X-Force. He's pretty important, and he's also one of these 90s artists that's really hot right now, along with Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane and so on. You can also buy art from auction houses, and then of course from art dealers like myself at Panel Page Art. And then there are a few other reputable dealers that I'm in competition with, I could tell you about as well.
And soon enough, you'll be able to buy some on the Collectable platform, on their BWIC platform. And,
Absolutely.
you said Deadpool, you might have seen my eyes light up. I am interested in the space as a fan of the movies and being entertained. And Deadpool, I think, is my favorite movie to come out of the comic book space in recent years. Before we move on, let's just say hello to Nick Barucci. Hit the thumbs up. I appreciate that, Nick. And
Nick G, nice to see you.
To support our fellow community member, Glen. Hello to you, Jake Dahl, as always. Pegleg Pete, welcome to the show. Tom, that's Tom in Vegas. Hello, a collector's dream. And Nick says Cable, Youngblood, and so much more. Being, I guess, the same artist who did.
That's Rob Liefeld, the guy who I represent. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Excellent. So I want to ask you this next question. To the people who are joining us who are comic book or comic art enthusiasts, please understand that I am not one of your people, at least not right now. So I'm approaching this discussion from the perspective and through the lens of a sports card collector. And with that, Glen, what makes original comic art a great collectable versus the comic books themselves? Are there some of the same collectors of both? How is it delineated? How do you see the two coexisting together?
Well, I mean, I would say that like comic books are almost like a gateway drug, that a lot of comic art collectors actually come from comic books, and which makes sense, because if you like the characters that are in comic books, obviously the art that's drawn for the comics is sort of like a natural progression. Once you've, made a lot of collectors, they collect comics, and at a certain point their collection is full. They've met their goals, and then they want to move on to something else. And so they jump to comic book art. I do think that there are some people that are like, because of the movies, as we've talked about, like, because those characters are so ubiquitous in pop culture, that there are some collectors that come in that have no association with the comics. They come from the movies, and so therefore they're excited about the artwork, because this is like the genesis place of these characters. It's where they began. But I think that like the real difference for me, why I'm so passionate about comic art versus comic books themselves, is the comic book is sort of a printed matter that's separated from the artist's creation, and the artwork itself, I think, really sort of allows for a relationship with the collector and the artist who actually created this stuff. I mean, the artist actually touched the page that you own. He drew pencil and he drew ink on it, and he like you get a sense of his thought process, because maybe he made a few mistakes on it and there's some white out or some pencil corrections or something, and you get some insight into maybe what he was thinking when he created this thing. And so I think it allows your imagination to engage with the collectible in a way that you might not with a printed matter. Also, the art itself is large. The comics are 8.5 by 11. The art is 11 by 17, and it can go as big as 14 to 22. And it's frameable, and you can put it on your wall, and you can look at it from afar and still make out, what the details. Whereas, like, with a comic book and with a sports card, my eyesight is not what it used to be. And if I'm really going to enjoy Michael Jordan, I really have to look closely. But if I want to enjoy my Steve Ditko Spider-Man art, I can look from a distance and still get joy from it. Again, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but for me, these are like some of the qualities that I think are really exciting about owning a piece of artwork.
Well, Glen, well said. Lots there to chew on. I'm going to go first. Jordan, welcome to the show, says he agrees.
Hey,
Artists respond much more when you bring them original art to sign. They get to see their creation again after so many years. That's pretty cool. My sports card comparisons, you take a card to a player to sign. They've seen this card before in many instances. Peg Leg says there's one piece of art. There may be 100,000 copies of the comic, and they are all changed by size and color. And then I'm going to go back to Brett's comment here. An analogy, he says, to me, an analogy I might like: comics versus comic art is like sports cards versus sports memorabilia. A lot of people cross over and never look back. So what I say to that is that's a nice analogy, Brett, and thank you for providing it. But I would take it a step further And I would say the analogy that I would look for is sports cards to the original photography or artwork that was used to create the sports card. And that is not something that is really popular in the sports card hobby. I don't really know anybody who only collects sports card art or original photography. There are people that collect type 1, type 2 photos, but in that case, it's kind of a bonus if that image was used for an eventual sports card. So I think it's a neat analogy you bring, Brett. But I think there's even a deeper one there. And as a card collector, I think we as card collectors we should be a bit envious that you guys in comic books and comic art have this additional layer that we don't really have that's as direct. We do have memorabilia, but memorabilia is used in the games. It's hard to find an apple to apple comparison there. But I like the analogy, Brett. Thank you. Glenn, anything you'd like to add to this piece?
No, I'm curious, like, is there a marketplace for original sports paintings and photographs like you said? I mean, I don't even know myself. I don't know where, like.
Yeah, there is. So I mean, even Collectable has gotten into the sports art asset class business. James Fiorentino, one of the most amazing artists in sports art, is some of his pieces are being featured on the Collectable platform. So yeah, there is a market for it, but it's, I have a feeling that the market for comic art is much more evolved and mature than the market is for sports art at this time, meaning there might be some really good opportunities in sports art. Not that there aren't in comic art, but yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you, Glenn, next. You mentioned some specific artists. Is there, among collectors of comic art, are there some collectors who really favor and are loyal towards one artist over another, or one character or title over another, or one, Marvel or DC or indie brands over the others? How are loyalties and allegiances sort of established by collectors, investors in your space?
I mean, I think that it is there are so many different types of collectors. There are nostalgic collectors. There are collectors who collect by artists. There are collectors who collect by characters. There are collectors who collect by Marvel or by DC or by indie comics, and or just horror comics, or there's every type of combination you can think of. Absolutely. There was one collector who only collected Ramita Spider-Man art, and he actually changed his name to Ramita Man. So yeah, I mean, there's no, I can't say that there's any like one kind. I mean, I assume it's the same with sports cards, that some people want rookie cards, and some people want maybe only collect Michael Jordan, or some people, I think it's like, it's probably, I would say the parallels would, and I don't even know the sports world that well, but I would say they're probably spot on in terms of how you would delineate it.
Yeah, it sounds, by the way you explained it, that there are those approaches to it, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm just trying to find the parallels that I can, so I can better understand your world within the lens, through the lens of my world. Here's a question just came to me. It seems like comic books are predominantly based around superheroes, but when I was young, and please don't laugh at me, I was buying the comic book for the TV show Alf or Married with Children. But when I was even younger, for me, I would go to the comic store on weekends, mostly because the sports card store was in the back corner of the comic store. And I would flip through and buy used copies of Archie comics and Richie Rich comics. That's what I liked to read as a kid. I wasn't as much into the superheroes. Is comic art, is your world of comic art really only about superheroes, or is there a market for Archie comics and Richie Rich and all these other ones?
Well, yeah, they're so. What I would say to you is that the more popular the thing, the higher the prices are, the more that they're coveted. So like Spider-Man art, because because he's so prevalent, is obviously really important. Alf art, not quite as much, like, I have seen the occasional cover sell. So I can work something out for you if you really want, Jeremy. But um, I look, there are all kinds of genres that are selling for a lot of money right now, like the Sandman art by Sam Keith, because Sandman, well, that stuff was popular anyway. It was an important graphic novel, or set of graphic novels by Neil Gaiman, the important author. But then it also became more recently a Netflix show, which was really popular. And so, so it's not just superhero art. It's Walking Dead art is can be expensive and very important. And, so I think it has more to do with like what's Star Wars art is also very expensive, for example, comic book Star Wars art. I mean, the movie art, for the posters would be expensive also. But yeah, I would say that all of this is relevant. Archie art can be important too, although it's not really that valuable. Like you can get really, really good vintage pages, probably from the books you read off the newsstands, for $100 a page or something like that. I mean, they're not. So if you want to capture the glory of your younger days with Archie, I can probably help you out too.
Well, I'd ask you to. I would be interested in like a cover or two. Okay, I'm gonna run through a whole bunch of comments because there's some great stuff coming in. We still got a lot to get through.
Okay.
Jordan here says, as a comic art collector, I tend to collect art from the comics I used to buy as a kid. That's what we say in sports cards: collect what you like. Be true to yourself. I love that comment, Jordan. Thank you for it. Sticky Rice says, I think at a certain point, most collectors who are heavily invested will start to look for more exclusive items rather than retail collectibles. Yeah, I call that being evolving, maturing, becoming an advanced collector. Thanks for the comment, Sticky Rice. Nick says the comic art market is great and people like Glen are fantastic to work with. That's really nice to hear.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that, Nick, as well. 18 people. Well, we're up to 24 people watching right now. Collector's Dream says, I mostly collect cards, but have various signed limited edition lithographs on my walls. Very nice. Peg Leg says, Hergy and Barks are two of the top sellers and never a superhero between them. Very interesting. Brett says, one of my favorite pieces I've owned is a Jim Lee Scooby-Doo cover piece. If it was X-Men, it would be $100K. Scooby by the same artist was $4,000. Like, Scooby is where I would go Scooby myself.
I think I sold that cover for Brett actually for $4,000.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. And Sticky Rice says, but art is one of a kind and it requires a bit more education on the part of the collector to understand why it's so rare and valued. The market is not as digestible as retail collectibles. Thanks for the comment. And Nick says, get them now while you can. It's a matter of time before they go up. I think he's talking about Archie. So Glenn, we got to talk Archie comics. Okay. I want dibs.
Will. I will. I'm happy to get those for you. I want to expand just a little bit on what Sticky Rice was talking about. That like, I think what's difficult about the art market in terms of entry is that you do need an education. It's much easier, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, to jump into the sports card market where you have like all the statistics of what the latest sales are at your fingertips, right? Like, I mean, with artwork, it's much harder. You really have to educate yourself on comps, and comps are harder to find because when you're dealing with one of a kind items, that means you have to find sort of like apples to apple-ish oranges, as opposed to like, you have to find other like items and then draw a correlation between them and try and figure out if they're even. And that requires a little bit of creativity and some trust. And when money's involved, I think people don't trust all that much. So I think Sticky Rice is onto something there.
All right. Well, that's interesting. I think you're right. In the sports card market, you have more. It sounds like you have more data at your fingertips in terms of being able to establish values and what you're willing to pay. But you still need an education. You still need to understand how the hobby works and how cycles come and go and all that. So I think we have a commonality right there. Murdoch here says, I've been saying for years now, be glad the big tech moneymakers never really got into comic art collecting. Jordan says, harder for new art collectors to get started since there's no price guide.
Right.
Murdoch says, I still have my copy of the original Overstreet comic art price guide. I've heard of Overstreet. Sticky Rice responds and says, that's exactly right, Glenn. It's hard to find comps for things, and some people balk at asking prices when the comparable comic is relatively valueless. There's so many other factors on the art side. And my friends from the Currency Project says the art market is typically opaque at best. So yeah, thanks for that, and good to see you guys. I'm going to change the topic. We're going to come back to pricing in a little bit, but I want to ask you, as a sports card collector, one of the reasons it's so much fun to own cards is because you feel like you have a piece of the game. Maybe you own stock in the player, which is interesting because on Collectable, in their fractional platform, you can actually buy stock. You can buy units of cards similar to a stock. But that's why we like owning these things. It feels like we're closer to the history. We're closer to these icons, these legends, these heroes, some may call them. Notice the pun towards superheroes there. You know, is it similar in comic art and maybe even comic books? But let's stick to comic art, where if you own an original page or cover of a book that you read as a kid, do you feel like you own a piece of Spider-Man or Superman or Batman or whomever?
Absolutely. I think you not only own a piece of let's say Batman or Superman, but you actually, when you own the original page, you own a piece of that story. There are 20 pages to each story, and you have one page. And a really good artist, the idea behind it, what a really good artist does is he's supposed to tell a complete story in a single page. Like each page, if he's done his homework, should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, like any story. And so you have and it works that way for over 20 pages as well. Like, the writer should be focused on doing a story the same way. And so, yes, I mean, not only do you, like, if Spider-Man's on the page, you own a piece of Spider-Man by, say, the original creator or the artist that was drawing Spider-Man when you were in your nostalgic zone. Like, you own a piece of that, and you own a piece of his story, of Spider-Man's story, or Peter Parker's story, or whoever you relate to, or Archie's story, or even Alf. Even Alf, you own a piece of his story. So, I think there is a deep, very deep connection there. But again, as I said before, it's like, it's a connection there. It's a connection with the artist. It's a connection with your youth. It's I do think it is an all-encompassing thing, and it means different things to different collectors. And in some cases, it's just an investment for some people. But yes, I do believe that.
Good. Jordan, I love this. Jordan says, my passion is to own a piece of history. I think that's what, that's such a wonderful approach to keep in the back of your mind as you're working your way through collecting within a hobby. Murdoch here says, honestly, having looked at the high-end $1 million pieces of art, comic art, collecting is very easy. You don't have one or two dealers that have cornered an artist's work. Very interesting. Will, welcome to the show, says, Glenn is expressing that there's an art to storytelling, and he's right. And some of the most gifted comic book artists can express a visual story when there aren't words on the paper. That's really cool.
Thanks,
Jordan.
Will.
Jordan says the first appearance issue is historic for that character. Owning a page from that first issue gets a piece of that character. Yeah, an original piece. Very neat. And Peg Leg Pete says, Jordan, I helped Jerry Wiest write the comic art price guide 20 years ago. The prices are out of date, but there's a lot of good info in there. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I have a couple questions now, specific stuff. Who are, in sports cars, we have GOATs. Michael Jordan is a GOAT. Wayne Gretzky is a GOAT. Mike Trout is maybe a GOAT. Who are the GOATs of comic book art, both artists and characters, if this answer is even relevant, or the question is even relevant?
Right. Well, we refer to them as sheep, not goats, but that's just okay.
Really?
No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
So I mean, right now, like, Todd McFarlane art is really hot. He's like so the guys from the 90s, if you think about 30 years back, it used to be like the 80s were pretty hot, and before that it was the 70s art that was pretty hot. Right now, I would say the 90s artists are in control of the marketplace, and so Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Eric Larson, all these are all guys that were sort of like superstars. In fact, they broke off from Marvel and created Image Comics in the 90s, which became which is now a very important publication for creator owned material. But at that time, they all left Marvel. They were working on the X-Men and Spider-Man and all the important titles for Marvel, and they started their own company in the early 90s. And so these are the guys right now that are the sort of the go-to artists. Frank Miller is also one of those guys we'll talk about, I guess, in a little bit. He had a legendary run on Daredevil and then broke off to do his own stuff, and he re-envisioned the Dark Knight Batman for like the modern day audience. The Batman that you see today is really based on what he created in 1986, which was like a groundbreaking graphic novel of Batman that adults were reading, and that was on the New York Times bestsellers list, as opposed to, just being in a shop at a comic store that kids would read. So
okay, interesting. Good. Okay, so here Jordan says the OG, I think OG goats maybe are Wrightson, Frazetta, Mobius, and Miller. Sticky Rice says those Image guys really defined the look of the 90s. Incredibly detailed work. I can tell you've got some. A lot of people must follow you on Instagram or know of you, because we've got a lot of names I've never seen before, and that makes sense. I've never covered comic book art before. Glenn,
I bring my people with me when I go somewhere.
Yeah, you got your entourage. I love it. What is it? I have no idea. What is a splash page? What does that mean?
So a splash page is kind of like, it's close to like it's a single image. It's like what a cover is, but it's usually like the first page of a comic book. But it can happen in the middle of a book too. An artist just wants to really hone in on a certain on a certain like thing that's going on in the story, and so instead of like a panel page has like 5 panels or 6 panels or 3 panels or even 2 panels. But if it's a splash, it's generally speaking, it's just one single image on one page, but it's not the cover.
Like a lot of pages will have, say, six frames. This is a single frame page, basically.
Exactly.
Are all of these, like in comic art collecting, is it all about one of one original art, or are there prints? I ask this because in sports cards we have one of ones, but we also have a parallel out of 5 and another one out of 25 and out of 100 and out of 1,000. Are in comic art, is it all about the original piece, or are there prints that are made and then sold, maybe numbered prints even that get sold?
So for comic art, it's really one of one. There are prints out there. They're usually for people that don't really want to pay for the comic book art, and they're usually pretty inexpensive, and they don't really go up in value. They're not coveted in quite the same way. Some of the artists working today work only digitally, so they don't actually create on paper. They do it all on the computer, and when they're done, they'll print out what they would call like a one of one, like a monoprint or whatever, and they'll sell that as if that's the original. And so there is a bit of a market for that kind of thing happening, but that's the only thing that I would equate in our hobby that's close to selling a print that has value.
Yeah, and I guess in the sports card world, we have a lot of just base cards that don't carry much value. Maybe there's a parallel to be drawn right there. Let's change the topic now. You had mentioned to me when I met with you earlier that there was a point in time when comic art started to be taken seriously as a investable hobby, collectible. Can you explain what caused that transition and when that occurred?
Sure. I mean, this is like, just in sort of like thinking about things, prior to 2011, most of the art that was like selling at Heritage, the really, really strong, good pieces were in like sort of like the 100K range. But in 2011, the splash page to The Dark Knight Returns came up for auction by Frank Miller, and it's Batman and Robin I think you have you might have a picture of it if you want to like throw
Is
it
that
up.
the first image you sent me?
That's the first image.
That one right there.
So yeah, so this was highly coveted by many collectors, and people thought it would do like the top of the market, maybe 150,000 at the time, and it wound up hammering in 2011 for I believe it was $448,000. So that was way more than anybody thought, and that was like, I would say that was like the start of a sea change for comic art, because at that point people were like, well, if this piece is worth 450,000 when we thought it was worth 150,000, well, then what is like important cover by Jack Kirby, who started the Marvel Universe, worth? And what is people start again? It's like the way our comps work is apples to oranges to a degree, where you start extrapolating. Well, like when you see something else sell and you think you have things that are more valuable personally, then it changes. That becomes like a sea change for the marketplace. And then the very next year, Todd McFarlane, who I mentioned earlier, sold the next image, which is Amazing Spider-Man 328 cover with Spider-Man and the Hulk on it, and that sold for $657,000, which at the time again was like a shock to the marketplace. So and then it just continued. In 2014, the very first page of Wolverine, his very first appearance, sold for $657,000. That's by Herb Trimpe.
Is that, Glenn, is that this image, this frame? This is a 5-frame page. This one, is this the first ever image of Wolverine right here?
In comic books, yeah, that is the very first image of Wolverine, right?
So to own this original art, I mean, to me, this is a grail piece.
It is absolutely a grail piece. There's no denying it. And for someone who loves Wolverine and can afford it, I think the owner of this piece will never part with it. So, and so yeah, like when we're talking about grails, it's really difficult to define what's a grail for anyone. I mean, my grails are very different than these grails. I grew up with, as I was telling you about, John Romita Sr. and Spider-Man. So my grails would be like, a specific Spider-Man cover that he drew, and I won't tell you which one because I'm still looking to purchase it. So I don't want anyone else jumping in front of me.
Right.
But
yeah, I get that.
But and art collectors can be secretive like that as well, because I mean, there is only one of one. So when it pops up, things can go crazy. So
so those last three images that we showed on the screen, those were sales from 2011, 448K, 2012, 757K, 2014, we saw another $657,000 sale from the notes that you sent me. Right. And then in 2022, can I show the next picture?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's show that one.
Because this is, I mean, the figure that you tell me this piece sold for is staggering.
So yeah, so what's amazing about this is just as everyone likes to talk about the Super Bowl and who's going to win, comic art collectors like to talk about like what prices are going to hammer for. And I think the consensus at the time was that this piece was going to hammer for about $300,000 when it went up to auction. That's that. And in fact, I think like a dealer had offered about $300,000 to that collector, and I guess he's very happy he didn't take it. So the idea of this piece is that this is the first black costume Spider-Man, and that costume is sentient, and so in essence, the costume becomes Venom later on, and so that this is like, in some ways, Heritage Auctions, which auctioned this piece, was very, very smart in marketing this as the origin of Venom page. And I guess whoever was bidding on this agreed with them, because at the end of the day, This wound up doing $3.3 million and is the most expensive piece of American comic art to date. So, the wonderful thing about Heritage that I'd like to at least mention, and we were talking about comps, is they have a free archive of all the things that they've auctioned since the beginning of when they started auctioning comic art, I think in like 2002. And you can go back and look at the history and see exactly what all of these things. So if you want to jump into the hobby and you're like, oh, I'm afraid I don't want to overpay and I don't really know what I'm doing, spend a few hours at Heritage looking through their archives. Just try and just pull up all the things that you're interested in and get a sense of like where values are, and that'll give you a real education as to what things are worth, so that you don't feel uncomfortable about making a purchase if there's something that you really love out of nostalgia that you'd like to have on your wall, besides a sports card or a comic book.
Yeah. Okay, I want to go to here. Will says that Hulk first Wolverine is worth a bit more now. Makes me wonder, does Will own that? I don't know, but Will is talking about this one right here.
No, he's talking about the first appearance of Wolverine page.
Oh, okay. So that was this one right over here then. Okay, right. I'm learning, guys. Be patient with me. I'm doing my best here. I'm trying to learn. Right. But yeah, I can tell you who all the athletes are. But okay, and then Nick says at least two people agreed on the value. They must have. It takes two people to tango in an auction. And Pegleg Pete says, Glenn, what is the current normal price range for a panel page by the black costume artist?
By the black costume artist, does that mean like
another page from the book? Probably another page from.
I mean, like lots of artists have done. Oh, I see. Mike Zack. Okay, got it. Yeah, the artist is Mike Zack, and so you can buy a Spider-Man page by Mike Zack, a good one, for like $5,000 or something like that. Okay. So yeah, 3.3 million is a little higher.
Yeah, well, right here, Nick says, rumor has it that the owner on Hulk number 180 turned down $2 million. And I'm not like discrediting that, but I love rumor. I love when it starts rumor has it, because it's unsubstantiated, or at least that's what Nick is letting us.
I mean, I think like you can like, if I were the owner of the of that page, I'd probably turn it down too, because if Venom is worth 3.3 million, then the first Wolverine should be equivalent with that, at least. So
here I am agreeing with you, like I know.
Well, Jeremy, you're one of us. I feel like we've converted you.
Well, I hear these are names that I'm familiar with. These are movies that I've seen. I mean, it does make sense. Brendan Ryan says Hulk 181 is a key book. Good to see you, Brendan. Usually a sports card guy, but an art guy as well. So let me ask you this. You just took us through, and there's actually, before we do that, let's go on to this piece right here that also sold last year. Right. 2.4 million, as you've advised me. Right. It's a Frank Miller piece. Why is this? It looks pretty simple to me. I do love it. It's pretty cool.
Right.
But it took me a while to figure out where Batman's head was when I looked at it. I found it. But what can you tell us about this piece and the $2.4 million price tag?
I honestly think that as a piece of art, it's certainly stunning, and he's in silhouette, and it's the first issue of the groundbreaking series. So I think really what sold this, however, is the name Frank Miller, and the fact that this is like the most important Batman graphic novel of, I think you can easily say that it's name value. The other thing that I need to point out is that when this thing hammered at 2.4 million, you're going like, that's awesome, this is great. But in reality, a lot of the comic art collecting community was disappointed when it hammered for the measly sum of 2.4 million, because this was on the heels of that 3.3 million sale. This one came afterwards, and people thought, because this was such an important book, that it was going to do like 4 million or 5 million. Again, like the pundits were all, so when it only hammered for 2.4 million, And by the way, I can tell you who bought this because he's made it public. The owner of Heritage Auctions thought this was was a great deal at 2.4 million, and he's the one who took it down and bought it.
Nice. Very, 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 very interesting, for sure. To me, this is a really nice piece. These are two completely different things to me. This is black and white. It's pure comic book art. It's striking. Whereas this is color. This, to me, is a piece that you hang on a wall. You can look at from 20 feet back and love it. Whereas this one here, you want to get a little bit up close. You want to read the words. You want to see the detail in the pencil and all that. They're both, I think they're both really cool. So, okay, in the interest of time, we are going to continue, but I can't continue. I'll bring up Dex Flow's comment right here. It says, I'm not a sports card guy or comic guy or a toy guy. I'm a Jeremy Lee guy. I appreciate that. Dex Flow.
I agree with that.
Thank you, fellas. I appreciate it. Thomas Fish in the house. Good evening, Thomas.
Tom.
Good to see you, Tom. If you're I know a Tom Fish too. I don't know if it's which one that is, but welcome to the show. And Jordan says the Dark Knight cover is both artistic and historic. Yeah, very, very cool. And we are talking about your wolf. Said I heard you guys were talking about my Wolves page. There you go.
You just found the owner, Jeremy, of the Wolverine page.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Okay, well, welcome to the show, Thomas Fish. Good to see you. Okay, so we've just gone through these pieces. We go from, 150K from kind of before the transition through the $500,000 into the $750,000 to 3.3, 2.4. These are big numbers, big numbers. With all that said, how do you feel, Glenn, in terms of the value of comic book art right now? Do you think it's undervalued? Do you think it's underappreciated? Do you think it's where it should be? What are your thoughts on the state of values in your space right now?
Well, I'm pretty excited about the marketplace. I mean, for a long time during the pandemic, I was worried because prices were escalating at such a crazy value that I thought, like, oh my goodness, like, is this sustainable? And, where are the people going to keep coming from as prices escalate? But I think that they've leveled off a little bit. They haven't gone down in the same way that I understand comics have gone down. And you and I discussed sports cards have gone down in value with sort of the end of the pandemic. So I feel like prices have stabilized. I also just feel like there are more and more people coming into the hobby and discovering the excitement of it for some of the reasons that I discussed earlier of why people love art. I do think that like this sort of like throwaway illustration type artwork is becoming to be admired more seriously by the public, and prices are justifying that. They're almost getting into fine art territory. And next year, I believe George Lucas, Star Wars George Lucas, is opening a museum in Los Angeles where he will display his collection and stuff that he's bought for this museum. It's going to be a world-class museum that they're spending billions of dollars on to it's going to be at Exposition Park in Museum Row there. And they're going to show comic book art, and they're going to show story art and illustration art. And I do believe that's going to be a game changer when that opens and the public looks at that stuff and realizes, what this stuff really is. So I think we're at a place where values are still escalating, and the market is still really healthy. Even though, unfortunately, a lot of people who have been collecting for years are starting to get priced out, and so yeah. I think that's discouraging for a number of collectors.
For sure. Yeah, it can be. But, here, Sticky Rice says, I personally feel these results might not be repeated in the post-COVID slump. Everything went up too quickly and everything has dropped off. Certainly true in sports cards, maybe not true in comic art. But when prices come down, that does make items more accessible again. So there's always, while you may own a piece that has come down in value, you can now buy, you can dollar cost average a little bit if you're looking at it from that investment perspective. A quick hello to you, Michael Ham. Good to see you, pal, as always. Okay, I wanted a couple more things we got to get to here. One of which is if I'm new and I'm looking to enter the space of comic art, what's some advice you would give me, and what platforms are there for me to, where should I be looking? Where should I be? Obviously, your
Sure.
business panel page art. I mean, we got to plug that, but
Right.
where else can I go? And what advice would you give a newbie? And I'm curious what you obviously do. We have some advanced collectors in the chat as well. I'd like to hear from you guys as well, but we'll start with you, of course, Glenn, if you don't
So
mind.
there, I mean, obviously there were a lot of places. There's Panel Page Art, which is my website, which you can go to, and I have, like, I think about 600 pieces of artwork that you can peruse. There's Nostalgic Investments, which is another great dealer who has, like, great art. There's Will Gabrielle's comicpage.net. There is Albert Moy, who's been doing this for years. There's, like, Heritage Auctions, obviously, is the main auction house. There's Comic Link, and there is Comic Connect, which is Metropolis. They also sell comic books as well. So there are a number of places. There's a thing called Collectors a CAF, which is collectors. It's like a gallery of collectors where you can go. You know, there there are, like, there are a ton of places that
Okay.
that one can find this stuff. So
Yeah, well, good. And I guess another place soon enough is going to be the Collectable platform and their BWIC
right,
channel, which
exactly.
is Bids Wanted in Competition. Why don't
Which
we
I'm
use
very
that
excited
opportunity to take a look at the pieces that that you are going to be submitting or have submitted to Collectable for that? Is that okay if we do that now?
Yeah, let's do that. That'd be great.
Okay, so the first one, which you sent me images, this is a pretty cool looking piece. The detail is quite stunning. So I'm just looking at your notes that you sent me. This is done by Jack Kirby. I've heard you say his name already. So from the 70s.
Jack Kirby is probably the most important comic book artist in comic books. He's sort of the father of Marvel. I mean, he created all the Fantastic Four, the X-Men. He created the most of the characters in the Avengers. You know, he had his hand in Iron Man. I mean, basically Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are known for creating the Marvel universe. So he created Captain America in the 40s, and so he's known as the King of Comics, and is probably the most important comic book artist that we know of. This is his premier creation, the Fantastic Four. He did this cover just before 1970, when he left to go to DC and create a whole new universe called the Fourth World. But this is a wonderful piece of artwork because it has all of the Fantastic Four in battle, and they're battling the Frightful Four, one of their main villains. Very, very rare to get, like, a full battle cover by the Fantastic Four, and the Fantastic Four are going to be very, very important to the cinematic universe, as they're going to be, like, launched in film in 2024 as well. So it's incredibly difficult to find Fantastic Four pieces by Jack Kirby, and this is really one of his best ones. So I was excited to donate this to Collectable for their very first auction that has comics and comic art in it.
Very neat, very neat. Before we go to the next one, you had mentioned Metropolis Comics, and I'm assuming you and your people know what Metropolis is, and I just like to let everybody know that 2 Sundays from now on this show, Collectable Live, my guest is going to be Vince Zerzullo, who is from Metropolis. He'll be on the show a couple weeks after you. So I'm going to really, myself and the Sports Cards Live, Collectable Live audience is going to get quite the lesson in comic art and comic books here in the month of February. So excited about that. Okay, let's take a look at the next item that is going to Collectable. Listen, I'm looking at your notes, so if you don't mind, John Romita Sr. Now, this is a name that seems familiar to me. I don't know why, but it feels familiar to me. 76 Spider-Man, Spidey Super Stories, original cover art number 17. What can you tell us about this piece and John Romita Sr.?
As I mentioned, Steve Ditko created Spider-Man. We were talking about him earlier. In 1965, I believe Steve just up and quit. Like he left Marvel, and John Romita Sr., who had just come over from DC, the romance department, was given the task of taking on the mantle of Spider-Man. And John Romita Sr. is considered probably one of the definitive Spider-Man artists, because he took Spider-Man from Ditko and really made Spider-Man into sort of a household name. The image of Spider-Man that we know today is really sort of based on Romita's version, and he became very, very important to the Marvel house style and became the art director of Marvel. So this particular piece is just like his peak period, and he's also famous for doing Captain America. The image of Spider-Man has been reprinted for merchandising over and over again. It was also used on one of the small pocket books in 1980 that reprinted the news strip that they did for Spider-Man. So this is really, really one of his iconic images. And again, I thought a very, very special piece to kick off Collectibles auctions with.
Awesome. That's really cool. It's nice to see Collectible expanding outside of just sports cards and memorabilia into TCG and comic art and sports art and others. Wine. We had the wine guy on last week, Atul Tiwari of Cult Wine. So I'm loving this education. Okay, let's go to the third piece. It's another John Romita Sr. piece, 1965 Avengers, number 23. One original splash art. I mean, this is pretty cool that it's big. You know, I love it. What can you tell us about this piece?
Well, yeah. So it like size does matter, and this is like 14 by 22, I guess. It's you've got Hawkeye, which now of course has is important. He's had his own television series with Disney, and Scarlet Witch, the same thing. So you've got 3 of the 4 Avengers from this period. Captain America isn't here, but they're talking about him. And Don Heck, who took over the Avengers comic strip right after Jack Kirby, who originated the Avengers, had like a 30-issue run. And this is one of his splash pages. But what's really important about this is actually John Romita Sr.'s very first work when he came to Marvel in 1965. And he, as I mentioned, he came from the romance department, and you can see in Scarlet Witch, like, you know, she really looks like one of the love story women that Romita was so famous for. And so this is like this is a historic piece of art because it's his first, but it's also and it's beautiful. And you've got these 2 Avengers that are so important to the cinematic universe franchise at this moment. So again, I thought a really important piece of art that would be, I really wanted to give Collectible 3 things that I thought were standouts, and all of these pieces are special in different ways.
Right on. Yeah, you've made that obvious to me. I mean, I tend to whenever I bring on somebody from a different collectible genre outside of my main one being sports cards, I always feel like I'm susceptible to becoming a part of your community, because I just think all this stuff is so cool. I want to just do a quick shout out and thank you to Nick Barucci, who is saying, let's support Glenn and Jeremy. 33 watching, only 19 likes. One last ask to get everyone to hit that like button. And even Steve Elmore jumps and says, come on, people, it don't cost anything to hit that like button. Thank you, fellas. Much appreciate the support. Okay, Glenn, we are basically out of time. But before we end this, I'm going to just run through the comments that have come in that I find to be really interesting. Sticky Rice here says that I'm really looking forward to the Lucas Museum. I own the first double-bladed lightsaber appearance, thanks to Glenn.
Oh, nice. So, that's right.
I mean, Glenn, you're obviously
I remember selling that to you.
Yeah,
I'm glad you still have that and enjoy it.
You're fulfilling some dreams here, it sounds like. Murdoch says everything has peaks and valleys. The economy is in a valley right now, but once the money comes back in, people will go back to buying. I can't really disagree with that. Will says that's the great and horrible thing about one-of-a-kind originals. Often, once they go into a collection, they tend to stay there. maybe for decades. And I think that's one of the key factors in creating value overall. The harder something is to get, the more you're going to pay for it once you have that opportunity. So I think in any collectible genre, you need that end user. You need that true collector who wants to hold it. And so that's good to hear that occurs in your space as well. Will goes on to say, but also drives up interest for similar pieces. One of the reasons prices have not softened. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thomas Peterson calls out another platform, comic art
right,
fans.
That's what I was talking about before. Comic art fans. Yeah.
Comic art fans. Great. Thanks for clarifying, Thomas. Will says, great example of a Kirby cover. It was in a collection in France for a couple of decades. So one of the ones we were looking at. Brendan Ryan says, I'm not seeing any original Gru, the Wanderer stuff. It must be rare. Good stuff, Brendan. And Will says, that is probably the best Spidey Super Series covers, also a bicentennial classic and by John Romita Sr. So obviously,
Thank you, Will.
you know, I love all the different factors that go in. And when you talk about the cinema and movies and, you know, kind of even Deadpool. I mean, I had heard Deadpool, but until I saw that movie and I was like, oh, Deadpool is the coolest superhero of all time, at least for me. It's neat how their lives can keep on being, or the character can be brought to the forefront of culture and society kind of over and over again with the remakes. I remember when Batman came out in like 1988 or 89, and I thought, or was that after that?
Anyway, no, that's right. That's right.
The Michael Keaton version. I remember thinking, well, that's great. This is the new Batman. I didn't think there'd be more and more and more. I thought that was it, but they can keep on reinventing these stories and characters. And I think that's what really helps prop up the comic book and comic art spaces. Derek Cass says, I'd love to see some old Mad magazine pages. Is there a interest in that? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. Too? Yeah. I mean, yeah, Mad art is very popular, and
I'm sure.
I mean, yeah.
What was his name? E. Newman.
Alfred E. Newman.
Alfred E. Newman. Right on.
Let me worry.
Yeah. Awesome. Love it. Okay. Well, listen, we are gonna wrap this up. We're just over an hour, but I'm glad to say, Glenn, we hit pretty much everything on the notes. So I think, actually we hit everything. So that's good. Did. I was concerned, but we accomplished it all. So I want to thank everybody in the chat, you guys who are pushing for likes. You know, I appreciate that. We don't come out here and ask for them too often ourselves, but always appreciate when people do. If you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe to the channel. We are mostly sports card related, but hey, maybe you'll pick up a new hobby of your own, and maybe some of us will come over to your side as well. So I appreciate all the new people who came over and supported this episode with Glen Brunswick of Panel Page Art. Glenn, thank you to you. Final word to you, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Okay, great. You know, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, and it was about that compare and contrast thing. I don't know if we still have time to do that, but it was like the Steve Ditko page of Spider-Man 29. Yeah. So here's just as a final note, what I wanted to talk about was this, in 2020 sold for $240,000, and it's huge. It's like the same size as that Avengers splash we talked about earlier. It's 14 by 20. It's 4 panels of action in Spider-Man battling the Scorpion. It's about as good a piece as you could ever hope for. And at the same time, if you show the Amazing Fantasy 15, this book in 7.5, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man, sold for $300,000. So it sold for $60,000 more than like one of the very best pages of Spider-Man by the original artist. And so for $60,000 more, you can buy the comic book on virtually the same day, which if you look at the notes that Heritage left, there are 61 copies of this particular book in higher grades. So if your house burns down and you own this comic book, you can buy it another 61 times in an equal or greater grade. But you have to pay more for it. You have to pay $300,000 versus $240,000. So I only bring this up, you know, not to say one is better than the other, you know, or anything like that, but these things are one of a kind. And I just think it's like an interesting comparison that like you can get the best of the best comic book art. Now, people will say, okay, so, but the 29 pages isn't the first appearance of Spider-Man in the way that the comic book is. But the way fine art like thinks about artwork is, they want peak artists drawing their best work. And so a page from 29 is probably Steve Ditko's best, the epitome of his art. This is probably one of the best pages he ever drew. So, so for right now, as the market stands, for less money than one of the best comic books from his first appearance, you can get a page like this. And so I guess
I think from a scarcity perspective, it's certainly, you make an important point. I just want to say that this to me is much more aesthetic and much more beautiful to look at. It's just, I think the addition of the color is why you might see some of that disparity between values. I think this I would rather look at this than this myself, but from a rarity and scarcity and maybe ultimate value perspective, I could see what you're saying, that you're getting a bargain when you're getting an original page of original art, yet this to me has more aesthetic value.
Okay, well, I mean, I can appreciate you're saying that. I mean, I think that like a lot of, once we get into sort of coveting artwork, that looking at the black and white page becomes sort of like a standardized thing, that like color is almost distracting, because really what you're looking at is the artist's vision and the brush strokes and the beauty of what the black and white is. And so in a way, like, the color is it's more aesthetically pleasing. It's more like the comic book you read when you were growing up, and it represents that, but you're not really getting the true artistic vision, I guess, is what
Fair enough. Yeah,
I would counter that with.
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate that. Triple V, good to see you. All right, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Glenn, thanks again for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremy. It was
You're
really
welcome.
a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure as well. This episode is now over. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.